Material Differences, Chapter 8, Part 2, Ghosts of the Living. "Did you see the Cristaldi coming in?" Raven asked, then changing the flow of the conversation. "Hard to miss," Ham nodded. "They've been slowly stepping up food shipments off-world, which is a good sign. I don't envy the crew, though." Dad had just been talking about how he thought they had good crew luxuries, Raven mentioned with a tilt of her head. "Oh, sure. Twice the luxury, 3 times the maintenance." Ham snorted. "The only reason the Antarans made such a fuss over it was because they were annoyed with the FVS," Ham mentioned next, which made Yeager frown. "How you figure?" he asked. "Absolute dynamics," Ham said as if that were enough of an explanation. When he noticed Raven and Yeager both staring at him with a lack of understanding, he realized he needed to explain. The Antaran shipyards were known for good, reliable, but rather boring ships. The Milanese, of course, made fancy exotic yachts to add variety, but they could never beat absolute dynamics. Over the life of the company, they had more best-in-class ships than, the next 3 contenders combined. More, maybe. What? As ranked by the Void Vehicular Vagabonds? Not only do they have a terrible name, but they're hardly an unbiased set of judges, Yeager scoffed. "Look, just because you're from Earth and you can't appreciate the finer points of shipmaking doesn't mean I have to listen to you bad-mouth proud Void institutions." Ham huffed back as he crossed his arms. But the fact remains that absolute dynamic ships were the best. "In every category!" He coughed then and said much more quietly, "Except cost." "Oh yes, what's that last bit?" "Sounds like a category in which absolute dynamics ships weren't the best." Yeager smirked. "Well, it's impossible to be the best at everything," Ham explained. "So their ships were expensive. They were still the best." "Wasn't the general rule that any of their ships would cost more than 3 of their competitors in any given class?" Yeager asked. "Only because they were worth it," Ham insisted. "How's this relate to the Cristaldi?" Raven asked as Yeager and Ham looked at each other for a moment. Yes." "Right," Ham nodded as he tried to mentally backtrack. Antarans!" He remembered the thread of his thoughts. Their ships and shipmakers were good, but not good enough. They felt slighted, especially after the Vanto incident. So when the Milanese stellar artisans actually managed to turn around and make the Cristaldi, they made a big show of it. Even Triple Vi gave them a glowing review, a blend of style, fashion, and form that hasn't been seen in blah blah blah, all that stuff. They had to make a big deal about their only major success in who knows how long, so they made it their humanitarian aid ship and kept showing it off with every chance. But you know what Absolute Dynamics did in the meantime? They made the Crucible, Yeager muttered slowly as he remembered the timing of the release. "The greatest line of freighters ever!" Ham insisted, but as Yeager was about to say something, he raised a hand. "Modern line. Debatable. Whatever! But what's not debatable is that those freighters kept the Void in the war far longer than it should have survived. As everything broke down and everyone else had to use precious ships to escort their convoys, the Crucibles could operate in convoys without escorts. As pirates and criminals began to prey upon merchants and freighters, they avoided Crucibles. When the star lanes began to fill with debris, the Crucibles just rammed on through. "Are you a pilot or a salesman?" Yeager asked with a snort as Ham smiled. "Hey, can't I have some pride in a well-made ship?" Yeager certainly did have to concede the point that the Crucible was one of the finest freighters out there. But he had other issues right now and nodded to the Puma sitting beside Raven. "So a synth cat. Do I need to worry about her seeing Raven as food?" he asked, but Ham shook his head. She doesn't eat much. Not active enough considering she was designed for long-range patrol and ambush." Ham shrugged it off. "Besides, she's friendly. Now." "How many hands did you lose again?" Yeager asked. "I don't see how that's important here." Ham non-answered once more as Yeager chuckled. "How does she get charged? She's got organic thoughts mixed in there, you mentioned?" Yeager asked. She's got some nanopanels woven into her, so mostly she just charges in the normal cat fashion by sleeping in the sun." As Ham said that, Yeager couldn't help but chuckle. "A solar-powered cat, huh?" he asked. "More or less." Ham shrugged. but there's a wireless charger built into her bed for a quicker charge. Why do you ask anyway? I know Raven is always excited to see the Forbidden Meadow, he mentioned as she gasped out. Yes! It's so pretty, she nodded in excitement. Think Catnip here can watch her? Yeager asked. Artemis, Ham corrected. She could walk with her, sure. Have fun, Yeager said as way of permission. Then, as Raven squealed with delight and turned to run off through the salvage yard as the synth puma turned to keep pace. As she headed off, Ham looked to Yeager. So, why are you actually here? He asked, and Yeager sighed before nodding to the Ravex satellite core in the back of the car. We really did bring that here for you to see, but it's not the gate traffic you should see. This thing went nuts because it spotted a target. A barracuda. He could already see Ham frown. Coming in from the rings. What? Ham frowned deeper. There's nothing out there, he remarked and then thought it over a moment before shaking his head. No way. We shut it down! If someone tampered with it or tried to activate it, we would know. Hell, everyone would know if it self-destructed. Which means either someone hacked it or they built a new one. And I'm not sure which idea is worse, Yeager mentioned. There's no way! That system was hack-proof. Plus, no one has the money to restart the project, Ham insisted. What is money, Yes, the project cost billions of dollars back when dollars were a thing. But what if you had someone motivated by something other than money? Like ideology? And they had 10 years' time to piece together a new portal? Yeager suggested as Ham thought it over. Who survived? He asked next, trying to think it over. That's what I've been trying to figure out. Yeager nodded. Plus, there are these surprisingly sophisticated scavs raiding targets around the planet. They call themselves the Draugr, and they've got dialloy axes and shields. You've got to be kidding. Ham sighed and slowly scratched his head as he thought. Okay, so if they're just using axes and shields, that means they don't have normal gun manufacturing facilities. Or, if they do, they're limited. That rules out most facilities. Not to mention it's dialloy and they aren't using bots extensively, Yeager added. So they've got the ability to manufacture dialloy easily, but only into simple forms. Yet they've also possibly got a portal. Vulcan? Ham said aloud as he thought it over. That's what I was thinking. But it can't be. The Crusaders overran that entire system 2 years before the end of the war. Considering the foundries there, I doubt they gave it up, Yeager pointed out as Ham rubbed his chin. Well, what if we work back from who could be alive with access to the projects? Or even knowledge of them? Ham suggested. Odinson is dead. Gregor is dead. Sasaki, I believe, is dead, Yeager listed off. There's no way Anya survived that explosion. Ham nodded. Lusaka, Ramirez, and Hauser all died in the assault on the central hub. Right? Ham confirmed. They did, Yeager nodded. Who was, he snapped his fingers. That woman in charge of Project Asimov? Annika Facilier. She's rotting in a packed prison somewhere. Ham shook his head only to pause and then slowly start nodding. But you remember who was heading Project Ragnarok? And if the rumors were to be believed, very intimately involved with Hotaru Sasaki, Amya's daughter. No, Yeager muttered softly and shook his head. Mark, Ham said even as Yeager didn't want to admit it. He fits every criteria. He had access to the projects in question. He's got the next best thing to Vulcan in his mobile foundry ship. He hates the Pact. He hates the Hive. Hotaru is likely able to copy her mother's work. What part of this doesn't he fit? Ham asked. For one, he's supposed to be dead, Yeager pointed out. And, well, I figure if he was still alive, he'd have come after me immediately. Except you're also supposed to be dead. I'm dead too. We are all dead. So why would it be a surprise that he survived? As much of a hothead as he was, there's a reason they gave him command of Ragnarok, Ham pointed out. Yeager sighed and rubbed his eyes as he thought about how well Mark fit in his mind. So his ship wasn't destroyed at Binary, maybe just severely damaged. He takes years to rebuild and has Hotaru working on new portals. He's a charismatic asshole, so he begins to recruit from people who would normally be scavs. Obviously, most of Project Ragnarok was lost in the war, but he's capable of forming the Draugr. That sound right? Let's get this inside and see if we can find out anything else, Ham mentioned as he pointed to the core in the back of the car. Yeager just nodded and opened the hatch, picking the core up as he let his mind wander a bit. Ham walked into his open workshop nearby, and to the back where he tapped a few buttons on his computer console before a chunk of wall and workbench slid back to reveal a hidden doorway. As they stepped through it, they were in Ham's real workshop. Pieces of bots were scattered about, and one of the walls was lined with weapons. Mostly heavy stuff for bots and mechs since Ham was a pilot, not much of a frontline soldier himself. In one corner was a core bank hooked up to a memory chair, which was where Yeager took the core. "Any particular slot?" he asked with a glance at Ham. "Bay 3, Ham muttered as he was warming up the console nearby. Yeager just nodded and lifted the core to fit it into the mentioned bay. There was a click as it snapped into place, and he watched the lights on the bank besides it light up as it began to check to see if the core was readable. "All right, let me take a look." Ham stepped over from the console to settle into the chair. After a moment, Ham sank deeper into the padding as the chair adjusted to cushion him inside, and the visor dropped over his eyes. Yeager didn't even need to do anything for him at this point. Since Ham was a synth, he could access more of the chair functions on his own, so all Yeager could do was stand around and wait. While he did, he slowly turned to look over some of Ham's other projects. The most noticeable one he found was what looked to be a combat harness of some sort. At first, he couldn't figure out why it was shaped the way it was, until he realized that he was looking at a distinctly Puma-shaped combat harness fitted with two M539 LMGs. Was he really crazy enough to strap those to the cat? That's the aggressor. Yeager looked over his shoulder as Ham slowly leaned up from the chair as the padding pushed him back up. That was part of the binary fleet, all right. "It has to be Mark, then," Yeager muttered with a sigh. "Any idea what he's up to?" Ham asked next. "No. From what I understand, he's been raiding places around the planet, but I don't have exact locations yet. Locals don't seem to see any pattern yet, which either means he's being subtle, or there is no plan, and he's just riling up the scavs." Yeager shrugged, since without more information he didn't know what was more likely. "There's a new boss of the old city scavs, though. Merlin told me about him yesterday. Big guy, mean, looking to unite the various gangs." "What's the plan?" Ham asked as Yeager shrugged. "Get everyone together. Stop him." It was as far as he'd gotten in the planning stages. "I was hoping you knew where the others were." "Cov was no help," Yeager explained. Some have wandered off, some are far away. I'm guessing you want whoever is on planet first?" Ham asked, to which Yeager nodded. Tanya is out getting drunk somewhere around Circuit Mountain." "God, still?" Yeager groaned and pinched the bridge of his nose a moment. "Who else?" he finally muttered. "Figueroa is still partying in the capital. Brandy Lynn I lost track of years ago. Considering how quiet it's been, she might be dead." Ham shrugged, but Yeager shook his head slowly as he thought back on her and her plans. "No. Last you heard from her was when we all met up in the capital, right? For Christmas? 7 years back?" Yeager confirmed as Ham nodded. "No. I know how to find her. She's still alive. But who else is on planet?" "Tabori," Ham replied, which made Yeager scoff. "That psycho? What's he doing these days?" He couldn't picture the sniper settling down for civilian life. "I think he either hunts big game or is an assassin for hire." Ham shrugged. "He calls every so often to hire me to lift him somewhere on the planet or between the moons. Very seldom, though. I'll have to contact him, but that takes time." "Okay. Tanya Figueroa and Brandy Lynn, the queen of whiskey tangos." Yeager listed off as Ham chuckled. "Just don't let her hear you call her that," Ham warned, but Yeager just waved him off. The pilot thought for a minute before asking, "So if it's just 4 of you for now and maybe 5 if I get Tabori, is that enough?" "I've also got you and Cov," Yeager added. "Yeah, I'm a pilot and I can't picture Cov getting his hands dirty," Ham scoffed. "Neither can he, but if we need him, he's in. Like it or not." Yeager checked his watch even as he said that. "I'll let Raven play around outside until it gets dark. Then we'll load the car into the lifter and fly it back to the compound." Fly back? Not drive back? I thought you never wanted anything close to the compound, Ham mentioned. We'll fly at night. Besides, my neighbors who could even see the compound are in that category of old survivors that know when it's best to look the other way, he explained. I want to make sure we've got the lifter so we can fly from there to pick up the others and back. Max is in the city now looking for any trail on the Draugr boss. Once he's got a lead, I want to act on it immediately. So tomorrow, while I go and do that, you call around to your salvage buddies up around Circuit Mountain to find Tanya's local dive. We go get her, drop her off at the compound to let her dry out, and then head south to the capital. All right. I suppose that means I have to prepare dinner. Ham let out an exaggerated sigh as if it were a terrible burden. I'll help, Jaeger offered, very used to cooking for his family. I'm just messing around, Ham revealed with a smirk. All you two get to do is pick which MRE you want. What? You don't have normal food from the locals? Jaeger asked in surprise. Hell no, Ham scoffed. Why would I waste the barter? I've got plenty of rations to eat here as it is. You'll run out eventually, Jaeger mentioned, but Ham just laughed. Oh, you're right. Here I am as a single person sitting on top of a depot that contains enough rations to literally feed an army for 10 years. I'm totally going to run out any day now, he mocked. Jaeger frowned and tried a different argument. Well, it's not healthy to eat nothing but MREs. I can't imagine how you've done it for any prolonged period of time. I eat too many of those and my colon resembles a soft-serve ice cream machine someone's using to mix cement. Even as Jaeger said that, Ham looked disgusted. That is a visual I did not need in my life. He made a gagging motion for a moment. But why would I worry about that? He asked. Jaeger was about to snap back that if all Ham ate were MREs, he couldn't be much different. Then he caught himself and hesitated, which Ham noticed and pointed at him. You totally forgot synths don't work that way, didn't you? Yeah, Jaeger admitted with a sigh. Raven pointed that out to me the other day at Shake It Out. Shake It Out is open again? Ham asked with a pleasantly surprised expression. Oh, I love their food. When did that happen? Like 2 years ago. You really need to get out more. Jaeger chuckled. Yeah, well, the last time I regularly traveled, it was to kill people. Ham shrugged even as Jaeger slowly nodded in agreement. Well, my friend, I think it's time for us to travel regularly once more, especially if Mark is out there plotting something. Jaeger scratched his chin as he thought it over. Hunting family again is going to be weird. Ham sighed slowly. Literally family in my case, Jaeger added. This whole time he figured Mark had to be dead, because if he knew Jaeger was still alive, he would stop at nothing to kill him. His brother-in-law was extremely vindictive, and it wouldn't matter if Leona's sacrifice had been her own personal choice. Mark would still blame him. Mark had lost a sister. Jaeger had lost a wife. He wasn't sure what loss was worse or if it even mattered. All he knew was he had another enemy to protect his kids from, another of his sins to wash away with blood. Well, should we start loading weapons? Ham asked, and Jaeger looked around the room for a moment before nodding. If we have to hunt, we might as well be prepared, he agreed. The work would give him something else to focus on now. Time to think of some way to explain this all to Raven. Yes, honey, you have an uncle, and he wants to kill us all. Jaeger was worried more about telling her what was going on than facing combat the next day. Combat he was comfortable with. Being a dad was terrifying every day. But as he thought of her and Max, he smiled and realized it was worth every moment.